I'm Mark Bouris and this is Straight Talk.
I could just hear the fire coming closer and closer. My hands and arms, they were on fire. I got this huge rush of elation because I was still standing, still alive. Helicopter came and then I woke up a month later in a hospital in Sydney.
Turia Pitt, welcome to Straight Talk.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Just talking to you today, Turia, what I'm getting from you is discipline, structure, self-belief, a good support group. Is that what you want to leave people with?
Relationships are the most important thing. So maybe being a bit vulnerable, not being afraid to tell people how much they mean to you. Because I know I was never good at that before this accident, and I've gotten so much better at letting people know how much they mean to me. I always struggled to explain how I did it, and I think it was every day I just got up and I just kept going.
Turia Pitt, welcome to Straight Talk.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Where are we talking to each other from on Riverside at the moment?
Oh, I'm in Ulladulla, South Coast.
God's country.
I was going to say God's country, but then I thought, no, that's going to make me look like a bit of a bogan. So I won't say that, but you've said it for me.
I said it, so I look like one.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but by the way, happy birthday, I think for tomorrow.
Yeah,
Is
it's
that
my
right?
birthday. Yes, 37.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. How old are you this year?
Oh my God, don't ask me how old I'm. 68.
I know.
68.
Well,
I'm 69 next birthday, yeah.
You've lived a lot of life, and I know you've got lots of lessons for people to learn.
Totally.
Including me.
I guess I'm nearly double your age. I'm nearly double your age. How's the world treating you at 37? How you going?
You know what? It's been pretty good. It's been really good. So live in Ulladulla. My husband's a helicopter pilot. We've got these two beautiful little boys doing a bit of work. I know you do a bit of speaking, Mark, so do I. My running program, writing. So all of that keeps me really busy, as well as my kids. So I think, to sum it up, life's pretty good.
So you've just come back from Indo.
Yeah, I went to Indo, and you commented on my surfing post, which I was really
I did. So I just looked at my notes here. I didn't realise this, but you were born in Tahiti before moving to the South Coast.
Yeah. So my mum's Tahitian, my dad's Australian. I was born in Tahiti, and then I think I've got an older brother, Genji. So I was around 6 months. They decided to move back to Australia. And I think they made that decision just for, I think, a better life for us kids. They thought they would have in Australia. It's a bigger country. There's more opportunities. So yeah, we moved here when I was really little, but I've still got family all over there. And my mum has actually moved back to Tahiti. Now, she doesn't actually live in Tahiti. She lives on a different atoll called Rangiora. I went and visited her last year with the boys. She lives in a really remote spot. She's got no electricity, no water, living in a little hut, kind of like, I suppose, what people did back in the day. And she's so happy. I think it's the happiest I've ever seen her. Which I think was a really good lesson for me, because after a week there, I was so bored, Mark. I was like, I want to go home, get me out of here. There's nothing to do. But I think it was a really good lesson, because I think particularly in our modern world, we're so busy, we're always going, we always want to keep achieving and doing and being productive. And it was a really good insight into, whether that stuff, whether all that achieving and all that producing actually makes us fulfilled and happy, or whether we get that sense of happiness and purpose by connecting to our land, connecting to our culture, connecting to our family, looking after others, that type of thing.
That's interesting you should say that. So maybe you could explain to me, because I'm not that familiar with Tahiti or Tahitian culture, or for that matter, Tahitians as such. I mean, it's, to be honest, a bit of a mystery to me. So Tahitian people are, I guess, are Polynesian. Is that Polynesian in terms of genetics?
So they're Polynesian. So they're part of the Polynesian Triangle, which is from Hawaii to Aotearoa, which is New Zealand, and then Rapa Nui, which is Easter Island. So Polynesian people colonized the whole Pacific Ocean thousands and thousands of years ago. Europeans, discovered Polynesia, and so Tahiti was colonized by the French. So everyone speaks French over there, but they also still speak their traditional language, which is Tahitian. But where my mum lives, it's I don't even know how to say it right. It's Puamotu. Don't know if I've said that right. So it's a slight variant to Tahitian.
But so your mum sounds like she's like full on as a Tahitian. Is she like full-blooded Tahitian?
No.
Person
so
by genetically?
No, she's not full-blooded genetically. And I think as well, Mark, with colonization, I'm not sure if many people would say that they're full-blooded. And I think for a lot of people, that question can come across as being a little bit denigrating maybe. So she's not full-blooded. Her mum is Tahitian. Well, her mum is from Rangiora and her dad is French. So her dad was a soldier who went to Tahiti, I think, around in the 70s. But my mum grew up, she never knew her dad. She never knew him.
Because I'm trying to work out, I'm trying to look at the influences on yourself.
Yeah.
Obviously, your parents are always big influences on all of us, particularly mums. I'm talking about in my case at least, because I can only talk about survey one, that's me, and I guess my own kids. But if your mum's influences are her mother and culturally Tahitian, especially given what she's gone and done now, gone there to live there, and it sounds like it's living off grid. How much of that has actually influenced you?
I think a lot of it, Mark, in growing up, I would say that she was always so proud to be Tahitian. Her mum was a single mum. She raised 4 kids. She fought the French government for decades to get her traditional land back. So again, in Australia, maybe a little bit like, land rights for our First Nations people. So my grandmother is incredibly strong and determined. My mum, just as much, she moved to a different country. She didn't speak English. She ended up having 4 kids here. She wrote a best-selling trilogy about life in Tahiti. She learned Tahitian as an adult, because when my mum was growing up in Tahiti, no one spoke Tahitian. It was frowned upon, so everyone spoke French. And so as an older person, she learnt Tahiti and started reconnecting to her culture that way. So I think definitely there's a lot of influence on me. And even if you look at my kids' names, Hakavai, Rahiti, both of those are Polynesian names. So it's something that I'm very, very proud of, to be Polynesian. I don't speak Tahitian. I sound, pretty Australian. My accent's pretty strong, or so I'm told. But I still think you can be connected to your culture, even though you might not, I never even lived in Tahiti. I moved here when I was 6 months old, but I still feel pretty connected to it.
And then when you're, this is about you, by the way, but I'm actually intrigued about your mum now. Your mum moved back to Tahiti and back to this remote, more remote place, and made a decision to sort of live this more natural life. Is probably a good way for me to describe it. What was her objective? What was she trying to achieve?
Yeah, and that's what all of us kids were doing, because no shit, when she first moved there, she was living in a tent. Like, it wasn't bougie, nothing about it was easy or nice. My mum is maybe close to 60. Her mum is maybe 80. So my grandma won her traditional land back, and my mum and my grandma went to the land, set up tents, and we're like, cool, we're here, this is our land, and we're going to turn it into something, a little bit nicer or a little bit easier. So I think that might have been my mum's objective. I think she obviously wanted to reconnect to her culture. She really loves Australia. She always says it's given all of us kids such a great life, and that is true. But I think probably a part of her was always homesick when she was in Australia. So yeah, Mark, my mum is the most fascinating woman you would ever meet. She's so badass, and she's someone that decides she's going to do something and then she just goes and fucking does it. And I've always really admired that about my mum. And if you think about, when I was growing up, I had 3 brothers. My mum worked full time, and every night she would write. She would work on these books that she was writing. And I just think the amount of self-belief she had was amazing. I don't know if I've got that same amount of self-belief.
No way. I want to ask more about your mum, because I actually think these things inform us. Because these things inform us about ourselves. I mean, I've been a big student of my own family, my own parents, and because everything I do, I have to be honest with you, like pretty much most things that I initiate in my life have somehow found their way into my life as a result of something my parents have done, which is I feel like sometimes I've never had an original idea. And I think maybe that probably applies to most people who have had a nice, good relationship with their family. Probably even people who had bad relationships with the family to some extent have formed ideas as a result of the bad relationship too. So if your mum right now, she's living sort of on the land that your grandmother, her mother won back. How long did it take your grandmother to get this land back to her, into her family?
It took decades, Mark. It took decades and decades and decades, which is crazy. And I think the thing is, it's mind-boggling to me that you have to, you've got to prove that something that always belonged to you and your family was actually yours. So it was decades going through the French court system. Everyone in the family helped out with lawyers' fees. My grandma now says that that's what gave her breast cancer, just the stress and the length of that fight. And so like my grandma's happy, she did it. She got her land back. She feels like she's done something really special for her kids, but also for everyone in the family. And I really think she has. And I think for one person it's kind of like that David and Goliath battle, right? To go up against the court system, which I presume would be pretty intimidating. But she did it. Took her decades though. Took her a really long time.
So are we talking about like something that's worth a shitload of money, or is it not about the money? It's about the thing that defines somebody. Like if this is my land sort of thing, and you should never have taken it, I want it back. Or is it sort of something really, really valuable?
You know what? I think if I'm to be honest, I feel like if there was some economic benefit to the French for having that land. So for example, if there was, minerals underneath the land or all of that type of stuff that we see play out in Australia, I don't think it would have been as easy for my grandma to win her land back. But it wasn't, it wasn't agricultural land. There's nothing there, just like a few palm trees and a few coconut trees, and it's a limestone atoll, like nothing grows there. So it's pretty, barren in terms of it being not really producing anything. But I think for my grandmother, it wasn't really about, winning this land back because it was going to be at a certain value that they could then sell and then split between the family. She wanted it back because she felt that's how she feels connected to her culture.
And so it's a matter of principle too. So
yeah.
So how does that? If I was looking at, by the way, is your first name your maiden? Not your maiden name, your Christian name, or whatever your first name is, I should say.
Yeah.
Is that a Polynesian word?
Yeah, it is. So it's Turia, and it means goddess of the ocean.
Oh wow! That's cool.
Most Aussies can't pronounce it, so I just say Turia. That's fine. Just
Turia. But it's
yeah,
Turia.
yeah. Oh, well done,
Turia,
Mark. You
that's
did a good
lovely.
job.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so, therefore, principles, because I always say this about my own kids, and I guess this applies to me too as growing up. Whatever I was told is not something that I really necessarily adopted or did. But generally speaking, what we see is what we end up doing. So what we see in our parents or our grandparents, in your case, your parents and grandparents, and what I saw in my parents and grandparents for that matter, and what my kids have seen in their father, I think largely can represent how we live our lives. So you saw your grandmother and to a large extent your mother too, never giving up on a principle. How much of that is parlayed back into your life?
Oh, I think all of it, Mark. You know, you think about the journey that I've been on, and I always hate using that word journey because it feels so woo woo. But you know, the past the past decade or so, particularly in those earlier years, were really, really fucking hard. And I always struggled to explain how I did it. And I think it was every day I just got up and I just kept going. And I think that's what my grandmother did. And if I think about my mum, you know, having four kids, running a household, putting food on the table every night. I had a dad as well. Sorry, I don't want to make out that my mum was a single mum. I had a dad, but this was back in the 90s where, you know, topics like the mental load probably weren't discussed as regularly. They weren't really part of our conversation. So dad worked, mum worked, but then mum also did cooking, the cleaning, the running of the house. So mum did all of that. And then at night when all of us kids were asleep, she would find this time to write on these books that were inside of her. So again, I saw my mum every day just doing those little steps, making those hard choices, not taking the easy way out, having this really high expectation of herself. And so I think all of those lessons and all of those things I saw growing up formed the person that I am today.
So when you were, if I go back to when you were a teenager, where did you sit in the sibling tree, like in terms of
So I've got Genji, my older brother.
Youngest or oldest?
Yeah, Genji's eldest, then me, then Heimanu, and then Tariki. So
you're sort of the second eldest.
Second eldest, yeah, only girl.
So when you were growing up in your teenager period, you're living down the South Coast then?
Living in Ulladulla, yeah.
Oh, the whole time. Okay. So just what were you like as a student? Like were you into it or didn't give a shit about school or more interested in sport? What was your deal?
Mark, I was a complete nerd. I loved school. I loved the challenge. I loved applying myself. And I feel like you know, and this is such a small memory, but you know when you go in for those careers sessions and you tell your careers advisor what subjects you're going to pick in your HSC, and so I said, you know, I'm thinking about doing physics and chemistry and maths, and he looked at me and he said, I just don't think you're smart enough. And I felt really demoralized in that moment. I went home and I told my mum and I told my dad and I told my brothers, and I said, oh, no, the teachers don't think I'm smart enough. And I remember my dad being completely outraged, and he was like, no, fuck him. He doesn't know who you are. Like if you want it, if you want to do those subjects, you can do them, but you're going to have to work really, really hard. And so I ended up coming first in physics and chemistry and maths and maths extension. I won the math medal.
Wow.
And it was a real, yeah, it's a formative memory for me, because I guess it was proof that no one else knows what you're capable of. You know, no one else has your mind, has your abilities, has your beliefs, and no one can tell you what is possible or what is not possible. And in that moment, I realized, well, even though people around me told me that I wouldn't be able to do those subjects, I fucking did them, and I did really well in them. So that was a little bit of proof for me in myself.
That's this sort of theme of self-belief seems to sort of be strong in, and again, I don't want to diminish the effect of your father, but seems to be a strong theme between the women in your family, grandmother, mother, and yourself. It's like self-belief to the extent that you need to get a little bit of a pickup every now and then, a little bit of a lift from your dad. Like as you said, he reacted strongly to the assertion of the vocational guidance person, whatever you call them, careers people, telling you that you weren't good enough. But at the end of the day, it had to be your self-belief. It had to be Turia's self-belief in herself. And I guess it probably gets influenced, these things at least get influenced by what you saw prior to that, everything you saw prior to that. And I presume we're talking about you were about 17 or 18 at this time when when you had to go and do your HSC. You're talking about the HSC now, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't know what they call it these days. Whatever it's called these days.
Year 12.
Yeah, whatever it's called these days.
Yeah, your final year.
Yeah.
Yeah, your final year though. And but that self-belief thing is something that I think forms in us when we're like from a young age, like, right from, 10, 12, right through. And it's obviously stuck with you. And because clearly, when you went through that tough period that in your life, you still had to have some self-belief in yourself. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. You're responsible for yourself. You got to get up yourself. People might help, sort of, give you a bit of encouragement, stuff like that. But it's up to you at the end of the day. It's just like when you did the year 12 or the last 2 years of school. It's your self-belief to do extension maths and do physics and all those other sciences and all those other things that you did and you did well in. But because it's not enough to believe yourself there. You've got to do something. You've got to actually drive yourself to do the work.
Yeah. You can have all of the self-belief in the world that you're going to do extremely well on a maths test. But if you don't look at the notes, if you don't do any study, if you don't do anything and you just loaf around the whole year, I don't know if that self-belief is going to translate into a very good result. So I think, you need self-belief. You need that desire to do well, right? Because if you don't want to do well in what you're doing, or if you whether that's in your work or in your relationship or whatever it is, if you don't want to do well, you won't be able to, right? So I think you need that desire to do well. But I also think you do need people around you. I really think you need a support system, because I could have had all of the self-belief in the world, but in hospital, if no one came to visit me, if my mum didn't bring me meals, if my boyfriend at the time, Michael, wasn't there every day, if you don't have those people in your corner, I think that would be really difficult as well to do well or to exceed expectations.
Yeah, so because it's interesting, you're right. Self-belief, it's an important ingredient. It's a necessary ingredient, but it's not sufficient to succeed at whatever it is you're trying to achieve. And if I just look at your year 12 period, it's not enough to be someone who believes in herself and the outcomes that you want to achieve, but you have to have a sort of a structured life. I mean, you have to get up at a certain time. You have to, if you're doing extension maths, you have to go to extra classes, which probably start at 7 in the morning or 7:30 in the morning. Some people may have tutors, but at least the schools, most of them put in an extra class for those extension maths kids and et cetera. And you have to be the sort of kid who can get up and get dressed and have your breakfast and go to do the thing, and then you have to do the homework around it. So where did this structured bit come from? Like this, let's call it discipline structure in your life, because it's all very well to be motivated, but at the end of the day, it's discipline that succeeds. We'll just talk a little bit later. I'd like to park the support system that we all need to have too, I think, and because unfortunately some people do not ever get a support system. But I want to talk about that in a minute. I'll park that for a moment. But this structured process, this process of being able to structure yourself and discipline yourself to actually execute on that structure, where did that come from?
Well, I don't know, Mark. I don't actually know. I'm a very logical person. I eventually became an engineer, so I think I I just really liked it. I liked having a structure. I liked being able to show up. I liked being at my class, prepared, being able to put my best foot forward. I liked having the right pencils. Some kids would walk in and they'd have chaotic. They'd have a purple pencil or a pink. I like to have the right pencil for the class that I was in, because I think if you, all of those little things, right? It's just like, they're so easy. It's easy to do. Like, it's easy to have the right materials for the class. Like, that's not hard. You don't need anything special to be able to do that. You don't need to be smart. You just need to make sure you have the right pencils for the class. Have your notes that are for that class. Again, that's easy to do. You pack them in your bag. And I keep saying it's easy to do, and maybe it was just easy for me to do. And I also want to say, I was lucky in that how my brain works, the structure that schools are and my brain work really well together, or at least they did when I went through school. And I know if you're neurodivergent, or, even if you're a kid and you don't have a safe place to sleep at night and you're waking up in the morning and there's no food for breakfast, it's going to be really hard for you to have all your stuff squared away, isn't it, for the maths class that you're doing later that day? Like, that's not even on your priorities list. So I think, just want to call out that I was able to put my best foot forward because I had all of that stuff. I had a safe space to sleep. I had a relatively straightforward relationship with my family. There was food on the table. We had electricity. Like, we had all of those basic things, which made it easier for me to be able to go, yep, I'm going to have the right pencils for this class.
Yes, yeah, very interesting. It's you mentioned earlier on, right at the very beginning, you said you're a nerd. I'm always curious when someone says that, because I was a bit of a nerd at school too. But being a nerd doesn't mean I didn't get up to mischief, because I did. But at the same time, when it comes to my schoolwork, I was nerdy. And what I mean by nerdy, and I'd like to know what you mean by nerdy. It doesn't matter what I mean by nerdy. Well, I'd like to know what you mean by nerdy. Do you mean that you were actually very curious about the topics that you were studying and actually loved maths?
Loved it.
Loved physics?
Loved it.
Or
Loved
you
it,
were
Mark.
nerdy to the extent that you just did everything you had to do?
No, I
Curiosity and
genuinely
love of the
loved
topic?
it. I genuinely loved it. So again, I think that's part of that desire to learn about the subject, right? I was invested in it. I wanted to learn about it. I was curious about it. I probably drove some of my teachers up the wall with my incessant questioning about things. So I genuinely loved it. Even like, I found an afternoon doing calculus, I found it relaxing. I found it soothing. I found it a great way to spend my time. So that, I think that obviously helps, right? If you're liking what you're doing, or you're interested in it, or you're curious about it, it's going to be easier to develop that discipline to do it, right? Whereas if it's something that you're not interested about, couldn't give a shit about, don't want to know about, to strap yourself to your desk for a couple of hours and learn about it, I think that's going to be really, really hard for you to do.
You're a bright person. I mean, so I don't want to look like I'm getting too deep into the weeds here, but if I might just put this to you, because you're making me think about my own school journey as well. Was it the chemical? Do you think it was in hindsight? Do you think it was the reward of, or was the brain rewarding with the release of chemicals for you getting things right, that actually was the thing that makes you become really, let's call it like addicted in a good way, addicted to hard work and curiosity? Because for me, it was always like, I used to get an adrenaline rush or a rush when I calculated something correctly, and particularly if it was difficult, and particularly if other kids, my peers, might have been having some difficulty with it, just getting the outcome correct or doing well in an exam, etc. I used to get a bit of a hit, a bit of a rush from that, and then over time, I didn't realize it at the time, but yeah, it was good. Yeah, I am. Dopamine and serotonin hits. So
Yeah.
like it's just hormonal releases that your brain is giving you as a reward for achieving an outcome. So achievement was a driver for me, and I didn't positively think about that. So was that something for you? Was that is just your academic nerdness, if there's such a word, that was driving you? What was really driving you deep down? What do you think it really was?
What was driving me? I wanted to prove to people that I was smart. My brain obviously liked those little hits of dopamine and serotonin. So I liked that, when you work out a difficult maths problem, that smug sense of satisfaction you get, like that's pretty fucking good. There's not many things probably Mark,
Totally.
you've done lots of big deals. So you're probably thinking, yeah, there's heaps of stuff that beats that. But that is an amazing feeling when you work out something that's really difficult. And probably that, that academic nerdness, as you so eloquently put it before. I think maybe all of the above.
How about because one of the big drivers for me too was I used to like to please my parents. I used to like coming home with, a good report card. That was a big deal for me. I don't know why. I wasn't a goody two shoes by no stretch of the imagination, especially where I went to school. Yeah, I mean, was that sense of pleasing people big?
Probably, Mark, and I think maybe it was a little bit to my detriment because my brother was a really, really good surfer growing up. So he had lots of my parents' time and attention, which I didn't articulate at the time, but I probably resented him because, all of our spare money would go into his surfing career. And I realized that through achievements in academia, I also got some time and attention from my parents. And when I say my parents, I'm mainly meaning my dad, but also my dad had really high expectations of me. So I remember once I got, 97% on a maths extension exam, and my dad, instead of being happy, he said, well, why wasn't it 100? And I think the next time I did get 100%. So it's kind of hard for me to talk about. And, I'm not trying not to denigrate my dad because of course I love him, but it was, he had really high expectations for me. And I don't know if that was just what, the style of parenting that he learnt from his parents as well.
But do you think that to some extent was maybe a good thing in any event because it gave you a high bar to achieve? I mean, perhaps if it wasn't there, you might not have actually pushed that hard.
Yeah, and that's what I get confused about myself. But I don't know if it made, if I reflect on that last year of school, all of that achievement, all of that hustling, all of that grinding, all of those late nights, I can't say I was very happy. It wasn't a fulfilling year for me. But I also think when you're working really hard on a goal, you're not going to be happy all of the time, right? You're going to be stressed, annoyed, tired, cranky, pissed off because stuff's not going your way sometimes. So I don't know if happiness is the end goal, and I don't know if you can. And at least for me, I don't know if you can be, happy with what you've got, grateful for your life in that sort of reflective mode and simultaneously really working hard towards something. I don't know about that.
It's very insightful. That's very insightful, Turia. Like, it's funny you should say it because, and I'd like to know what you think about this, but I have a concept in my life, which it's taken me 68 years to develop it, but it's not happiness as such. It's about, peacefulness is probably the most important thing, but on that happy, on the H level, it's about happy enough. And I think that you need to be and I'd like to know what you think about it. So I just like to be happy enough in the pursuit of what I'm doing at any one particular time, knowing quite well that there's going to be, during that pursuit, there's going to be periods where I'm not going to be feeling great. I mean, then the world of an entrepreneur, the world of a startup, etc. That's your world. It's a shitty world, but you have moments of highs and you have many more moments of lows. But if you can manage to have an attitude of I'm happy enough, then you can get through it. What do you think about that as a concept? Because you've obviously been challenged a lot in your life. So is happy enough probably where you need to be?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's so much focus on being happy all of the time. And I think that's part of our, I think our culture these days, it's a bit of a culture of this fake positivity, right? This, like everything's all rainbows and butterflies, or it's almost like you're not allowed to articulate that you're stressed or you're sad or you're going through something tough or you're feeling anxious. And I think most of us, we want to feel all those good, positive emotions, right? Like being happy, excited, enthusiastic. But I don't think that's reflective of normal life. And I think just as we feel, happy and excited and energetic and motivated, it's going to swing the other way at some points. And we're going to wake up irritated, stressed, annoyed at our partner, cranky. If in your case, Mark, you're working with startups and things like that, there's going to be shit that happens which really, really annoys you, really gets to you. So I do really like your how you look at it as being happy enough.
I guess post your year 12, the next stage of life is as a university student. You did engineering. Which engineering did you do? Which facet of engineering did you do?
Did mining engineering.
Why mining engineering? Why did you choose that?
Why did I choose mining? I looked up some mining blasts on the internet, on YouTube, and I thought, wow, that looks really cool. That looks awesome.
As in, you just went on YouTube and you looked up.
So when they're mining coal, for example, they'll blast that top layer. They call it the overburden. They blast that so they can remove it away with diggers and trucks, and then what's left behind is like the seam of coal.
And that's what inspired you to do mining engineering.
Well, I just thought it was cool.
Cool.
And I was also like, it's a little bit flexible, right? Those first couple of years. So I thought I could do mining, but if it doesn't work out, I could do something else.
So you graduated as a mining engineer?
Yeah. So engineering's a very male-dominated industry. So I think when I graduated as a mining engineer, there was like 5 girls in my class and about 50 boys.
And did you manage to get a job in mining?
Yeah, I got a really, really great. When you finish uni, there's all of these graduate positions that go out, and I got a really one that was held in high regard because I was still a nerd at university as well. So I got this job in Kununurra in the Kimberley region of Australia, at the Argyle Diamond Mine, which was, I don't know if it still is, but it was operated by Rio Tinto.
Yeah, that's where the pink diamonds were mined.
Yeah, that's the pink diamonds.
Is that
right? That's right.
And how long did you work in mining for?
I only got to work in mining for 9 months. Then I entered that Ultramarathon, which drastically changed the course of my life.
Can you tell me about the Ultramarathon, why you decided to enter an Ultramarathon? What was the deal?
I think it's just I like, maybe it's evident from my life so far, but I like challenges. I did mining engineering, which was quite male-dominated. I loved running when I was in Kununurra. I was away from the surf. So I just, kept running and kept running a little bit more. There was like a local half marathon, which I won. And then I did this ultra marathon, and I emailed them about it, and then they came back with the registration fee, and I thought, no, that's a rip-off. That's too expensive. I'll look at something later. And they emailed me, I think maybe 12 days before the race, and they said, oh, we've got a couple of free entry spots. Would you like one? So I thought, yep, cool, that sounds good, no worries. Entered the Ultramarathon, really excited at the start of the race, feeling excited, feeling nervous, feeling a little bit anxious. And I only got about so this ultramarathon was 100 kilometres.
Whoa.
I got about 25 kilometres into the race, and I just passed another checkpoint. So when you do an ultramarathon, they have things called checkpoints at, maybe 10 or 15 Ks through the race for everyone to check in and make sure everyone's going okay. So we'd all passed the second checkpoint. And I say we because there was five other people who were with me on that day. We were at the bottom of a gorge and we could see fire fastly approaching. Now we had two choices, Mark.
Wow.
So we could go back the way that we'd come, but there was really dry spin effects up to about my shoulder. So, perfect fuel for the fire. Our other choice was to run up the side of the gorge, which had less vegetation, so less fuel for the fire, but fire goes faster going uphill. So those were our options in that moment at that time. We all decided to run up the side of the hill, tried to cover ourselves, in amongst the rocks. I could just hear the fire coming closer and closer and closer. It was, of course, extremely hot for me. And I just remember looking down at my hands and arms, and they were aflame. They were on fire. And in that moment, I thought about one person. I thought about my boyfriend at the time, Michael. I think we'd only been together for a year and a half at that stage. And I thought about, when you're a young person and you fall in love, you have all of these hopes and dreams with this person that you've fallen in love with. And I just remember thinking how unfair it was that Michael and I wouldn't be able to, live this life of adventure that we talked about and that we'd planned. Now, the fire passed, so I don't actually know how long it was around for or how long I was burning for. Might have been 5 seconds, might have been a minute, I don't know, but it, moved through us. And I remember I got this huge rush of elation because I was, still standing, still alive. And I thought, fuck, I've done it. I've survived. This is amazing. Now we ended up having to wait 4 hours on that hillside, on that side of the gorge for help.
Wow.
Yeah, to arrive. I wasn't very lucid at the time, didn't know what was going on. Helicopter came and picked us up, took us to the local hospital in Kununurra. I remember saying to the nurses, can someone just please call my boyfriend because he's going to be worried about me. And then I woke up a month later in a hospital in Sydney. And I always get asked, was the fire painful? Was it scary? And yes, it was painful. Yes, it was scary. But at the same time, I think your body's protective mechanisms kick into play. So I had all of this, adrenaline surging, and for me, I had no concept of time on that day, didn't really know what was going on. And so I always say, yes, it was painful, yes, it was scary, but for me, the real work, the biggest challenge of my life so far, and I really hope it is the biggest challenge of my life because it was really bloody big, was when I woke up in hospital and I, had to go through that process of rehabilitating my life, rehabilitating myself and my body.
That's pretty crazy sort of the rehabilitation process, which we'll talk to about it. But is it because you were in a coma for that period, or was it an induced coma, or did your body just go into a coma?
So they put you into an induced coma. So they're doing operations on you while you're asleep, doing skin grafts and all types. I was burnt to 65% of my body, so that's a pretty large surface area. So they put you in an induced coma, I think, so you're not in an excruciating amount of pain, I suppose, and so that they can, carry on and do the work that the doctors and the surgeons and all of the, the medical staff do all of the work that they need to do to be able to save save your life. And then I think when everything's looking a little bit, the outcome's looking a little bit better, and that, you know, you're alive and they think they've saved your life and you're good to go. For want of a better phrase, they pull you out of the induced coma.
And what was the first thing you remember when you, I mean, I don't know how this works, but do you actually just wake up in the hospital somewhere in Sydney and then you look around and is there someone there in front of you? Well, what was the first thing you saw?
Yeah, you know what? The first memory I have is of my boyfriend, Michael. You know, he's looking at me in my eyes and he's like, "Turia, my darling, you're alive. Like, aren't you?" So, you know, I could see in his face he was overjoyed that I was still on this planet. You know, he was so happy that I was still there. And I was in so much pain, Mark. I was in so much like physical pain that I was like, no, I'm actually not happy to be, you know, I couldn't talk at the time, but that's what I was thinking. Like, I'm not actually happy to be alive. I don't want to be here. And I didn't realize the extent of my injuries at the time. It was just because, you know, if you talk to any burns patient, pain, and, you know, maybe this isn't just reserved for people in the burns unit, but for a burns patient, pain is an essential element of your day-to-day for, you know, if you've got a big burn like me, for months.
So it's very hard for me to understand for obvious reasons because I haven't experienced it, but I'm just going what you're saying, but I'm trying to imagine it, which is virtually impossible to do, I think. I can empathise with it, but that's sort of not real. When you say the pain that you were feeling when you first woke up, and you're saying to yourself, like, I'm not that happy to be here, is that as a result of you thinking to yourself, I'd rather not put up with this pain, therefore not exist anymore? Is that actually a thought process?
I don't know, and I don't know. Like, have you ever been so sick, Mark, or like so physically unwell that it sounds a bit grim, but like you almost wish you were dead? Like, if you're like violently ill, has that ever happened to you? Or no, it doesn't happen to people like Mark.
Thankfully, no. Thankfully, no. Or if it has happened, maybe my brain is eliminated out of my head over the years. I mean, I've had some terrible accidents in my life, but I don't think I've ever thought that. So therefore, I haven't been at that chronic point.
Yeah. So it's even just like even breathing with the ventilator, you know, my ribs expanding and contracting, that was painful. Like the process of just breathing.
Wow.
So it was just, I was in, my whole world was just blinding pain.
How long did you experience this
pain?
Extraordinary pain for?
Yeah.
But because was there a point at which it started going, oh, should I feel a bit better?
Yeah, so it does go like that. You do start to feel, you know, so that was obviously in the earlier days, and as the months progressed, I started to feel less pain, and then they wean you off the pain meds, so there's that kind of balance to consider as well. But because I've got such a big burn, one of the things I have to do every day is I have to change the bandages, right? So because I had such a big burn, 65% of my body, this process of changing my bandages would go like no shit for hours and hours and hours. And I would get so anxious. I would be in such turmoil thinking about this excruciating bandage change that I would have to have the next morning. I'd lie awake at night. I would be sweating, thinking about this pain that I was going to have to endure the next day. And I got really lucky in hospital that, I had an amazing medical team. And one of the nurses, came into my room one day. She said, look, we got to watch a TED Talk. I want you to watch this TED Talk by this guy called Dan Ariely. He's I think he's a psychologist, but he's also a burn survivor. And so we watched this TED Talk. I learned a little bit about his, he did some studies on pain. Basically what I got out of it is that if you start with the most painful area first and you progress through the dressing to the areas that are less painful, it's going to make your experience or your perception of that dressing change, of that bandage change, feel less painful. So what I decided to do was I volunteered to be the first burns patient to get their bandages changed. And it was, I think that was part of, developing, that was the start of me developing that little bit of discipline, eating the frog, doing the worst first. So I asked the nurses to start, be the first patient to get their dressings changed. And then I also asked the nurses to start with the most painful areas of my body first as well. Because then for me, like I learned in that TED talk, and probably like I'd learned throughout my life, when the worst is done or when you've got the hardest stuff out of the way, the rest of your day in comparison feels a little bit easier or a little bit lighter.
It's interesting you even started structuring your thinking process at that point. You were actually not too dissimilar to what you do in year 12. I mean, it's about structured thinking, which is very much an engineer's process. But, perhaps all that period of study and work and also you developing your own brain allows you to sort of build better understanding of perception, because pain's about perception. And, it's your brain telling you something that you perceive, it perceives. And it sounds like that you were sort of not manipulating, but sort of train your own brain around what you wanted it to do.
Yeah, well, if you think about your perception of pain and anticipating the pain, that makes it so much worse, right? So if I was lying in bed the night before the bandage change was going to be done, and I was already stressed about it, and then in the morning, when I could hear the nurses in the hallway pushing their little trolleys, that would make me even more anxious about it. And then when I would hear, a burns patient next door screaming about their bandage change, I would, my heart would already be racing. And there was no one in the room. There was no nurses in the room. No one was trying to change my bandages. But I was already in this state of being worked up and anxious and stressed and worrying about all of this pain that I was about to endure. So I don't know if at the time I could have said, I'm doing this because I want to be more disciplined and I want to have some structure to my day. I just watched that TED talk. I chatted about it with the nurse, and we decided, or maybe she even suggested to me, that going first might be a really good way for me to manage my pain. But it was a really good lesson for me at that time, because it reminded me that I still had agency. See, when you're a patient in a hospital, and you're a patient in a hospital for months, and every day you've got people coming into your room, they want to poke you and prod you, and totally get that they're just doing their job, and they do a really bloody good job as well. But I think I became a little bit passive in that I didn't realize, or I didn't recognize that it was still my body. I still had agency. I still had control over it. So I think it was a good lesson in reminding me of that, but it also reminded me that how I thought about things, or how I executed things, had a big impact onto how I felt about them, if that makes sense. And I said, I think that was the start of me realizing that.
That's very interesting. It's funny because today, we hear it on social media a lot about people getting triggered by something or other. And off the back of that, especially younger people talking about it, and off the back of that, we have, a lot of people will say how they experience some anxiety off the back of the trigger. In your case, it might have been hearing the trolley coming along, or without them actually removing the bandages, you actually were experiencing anxiety. To me, you're actually someone who's probably a black belt in anxiety in terms of experience, in terms of, a 10th Dan black belt in terms of experiencing anxiety. What would you say? You obviously talk about these things on your talks. You do a lot of talk and a lot of circuits around your experience, etc. What would you say to people today, particularly younger people, who are troubled by things that they hear or their sensory perception of what's going on around them that might be actually triggering or creating a lot of anxiety in them about something that could be about to happen. What do you say to these people? I mean, and obviously that's part of your job these days, but what do you say to them?
I don't actually speak to that many young people these days, not because I don't want to, but just because life with the kids and the family is a bit busy. I do wonder if we are maybe coddling younger people. And so, for example, if you go on social media or if you jump on Instagram and you find yourself triggered by what you see, for sure, that might be because of the algorithm. But I think also you do have some agency, right? You could remove Instagram from your phone. You could follow different people. You could, you could leave your phone at home. So you can take all of those actions to make that triggering or that anxiety that you feel about what you're seeing a little less. That's not to say that everyone who says that they feel triggered by seeing something on social media is just, it's all in their head, because we don't know what's going on in someone else's life, how they've been brought up, what their family life is like. We don't know any of that. But I do think there's a little bit of a balance. I think there may be a bit of danger that we might be coddling people as opposed to encouraging them to take some responsibility.
That's a very good point. And especially coming from someone like you, as opposed to say someone like myself or et cetera. I mean, coming from someone like you who's actually really experienced deep trauma, physical trauma, and probably the mental trauma as well that went with it. That's to me, I find that to be a deeply, not only insightful, but deeply interesting to me, deeply interesting commentary from you. Do you think, in an advisory way, that for any of us, probably not so much me, it could happen to me, it doesn't matter how old I am, but for any of us, should make sure that we do not undervalue the importance of support structures around us? And I said I was going to park that earlier on. I'm now unparking or driving this into the driveway. Do you think that making sure that we build good support around us, family, friends, in your case, your family and friends, but also your boyfriend to become your husband, how important is that as a prospective process that we should undertake, whether or not we end up experiencing the sorts of trauma that you experienced anyway? But how important is that, and how important was it for you? Because obviously you pre-did all this, Turia. You did this earlier without knowing that what was going to happen to you. How important was it?
But I think it is the most important thing. Relationships are the most important thing. And I think that's your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your family, your relationship with your friends, your relationship, if you're lucky enough to have a mentor, whatever it is. I think it is the most important thing. And it's not, it's not surrounding yourself with people who blow smoke up your ass and tell you how amazing you are and how good you are and all of that.
Like cheerleaders.
Yeah, and like cheerleaders are great as well, because sometimes you feel fragile. You just want someone to say you're doing a good job, right? You do need cheerleaders.
Yeah.
But if I think about, the constructive feedback I've got, the person who will always give it to me straight is my husband, Michael. He'll always tell me if something's shit, if something's not good, if I haven't done a good enough job. My dad will tell me as well. I remember the first time I did a motivational speech, my dad came with me, and afterwards I said, "Oh, Dad, how do you think I went?" And he said, "Turia, that was shit house. You should be embarrassed. You should be embarrassed that you are charging people money for that," because he said that was terrible. And he said, I'm sorry to tell you, I'm sorry to be so blunt, but he said basically like if it's something that you want to pursue, you're going to have to get better at it. You're going to have to go see other people how they do it. You're going to have to get some training because that performance was like terrible, absolutely shit house.
That's mad.
So, but I think you need, and I think that's the other thing too. We've, you know, and maybe even myself, your ego becomes so fragile that you don't like it if someone says, well, that wasn't good, or that wasn't a good enough job, or you need to do better, or have you thought about doing it this way? And I know, you know, if Michael, my husband, says stuff like that to me, it really hurts my ego, because I'll be like, well, no, everyone else likes it, so why don't you? But I think as well, sometimes you need that close relationship with someone, that trust with someone, for them to be able to tell it straight to you. And you're not always going to like what they have to say. But I think I'm not good at this either, but I think it's really good to try and be open-minded, try and take what they've told you on board. So cheerleaders are great, but I think you also need people who are going to be able to give you be able to tell you the stuff that you don't want to hear.
Yeah, well, that's I mean, I often get criticised. I have been often criticised in my life for being a bit direct. Especially I'm probably more direct to those people I'm close to. Is there a way that someone like me, who probably a bit like your dad, I just say it as it is. I mean, I don't really have many filters in my system. Is there a better way to do it, or is it just say it as it is? And I know I might crush someone's ego, similar to what your dad did with you on your first motivational talk. Is that okay, or is it maybe, you know, Dad and I, we need to change the way? Is there a midway point where we maybe need to change our way of talking to people like you? Because, you know, at the same time, we don't want to crush you. You know, I wouldn't want to crush my kids or my partner or whatever. I don't want to crush people. Advise me.
Yeah. I think, and this might not be right either, Mark, but maybe giving them a bit of direction. So if you just say, that was shit, you're awful, get out, that's probably going to crush someone. But if you say, I didn't like that because of X, Y, and Z, here's where or you know, you could say, what do you think you could have done to do it a little bit better? You could put it on them to ask, because I think as well, sometimes we might lie to ourselves. We might like to think something's good, but I think deep down, you know, you do always know if you haven't done a good job or if it's not up to scratch as well. But, you know, just giving people some directions, Mark, of what they could try differently or where they could go to, like my dad did after my speech, right? He said, go see some other speakers in action, go and get some training. You know, this has got to be a lot more polished.
And I guess to some extent too, in your case especially, substance over form would be really important, because you don't really want to play the pity card, so to speak. You know, people clap because, you know, we feel sorry for Turia. Like you'd rather, you're an intelligent person and a trained person. And not only that, person is you've actually you have experienced the trauma, so you actually went through the trauma yourself. So you would rather be applauded for your substance and content over and above the form, and that's a pretty important thing. That would be an important message to give to somebody, I think.
I think so, but I think if I was, you know, if I was just relying on pity, that probably would have all dried up years and years and years ago.
Yes.
Right? Because there's only
short term.
You can pity someone for a short term, but I think you've got to be able to go beyond that. So I think, substance is good. I can't remember the other word you used, Mark. You said substance and something else.
Content and substance over form. it's not about, what I feel, but it's just about what do you leave me with? What do I get out of what you just told me, the story you told me? What am I getting from it? Like, and I'm like just talking to you today, Turia, like what I'm getting from you is, discipline, structure, belief, self-belief, good, I'm getting a lot of important stuff, like a good support group, but probably even beyond that, having people who talk to me straight. And I think that's probably all of those things are quite motivational in that they sort of give me a direction. I mean, and I'm not me. I'm talking about me, the listener, and I'm one of your listeners right now. But me, the listener to you. I mean, I can't sit around feeling sorry for myself. I've got to do something about it, and that's what I'm getting from the conversation. And that's what I mean by content and substance.
Yeah.
Is that what you want to leave people with?
I hope so. I hope if after, listening to this chat, Mark, people feel, they feel like maybe they can take on that extra project, or maybe they can go back to uni and do extra study. I think that's great. I also think if someone listens to this conversation and thinks, you know what, there's someone in my life that I really love and I haven't told them enough, and they pick up their phone and they call that person and they let them know, because I think, I said it a little bit earlier, but it's our relationships with each other, with our spouse, with our friends, with our family. I really think that is the most important thing in our life, because if you take away all of those personal relationships that you've got with people, or that, that network of people that you've got, if you take all of that away, you're not really left with a whole bunch, are you? So I think, maybe being a bit vulnerable, not being afraid to tell people how much they mean to you or how much they love them. Because I know for me, I was never good at that before this accident. And I've gotten, so much better at letting people know how much they mean to me.
It's funny, like sometimes I like to sort of, this sounds like I'm putting things into categories, but if I was to, the words come to my mind when I'm doing interviews like this one, or just generally words. And the very first word that came into my mind when we were first talking about your early years was curiosity and structure. But curiosity was a big thing in terms of, the nerd part of all the discussion. But what I'm getting out of it now in terms of one word is gratefulness versus bitterness. And gratefulness seems like to be an overarching thing that's coming out of the discussion, even though you haven't used that word yet. But I'm getting a sense of gratefulness from you.
You know what, Mark, if I had had these injuries in a developing country, I'd be dead. No question about it. And I think I've got all of these great things in my corner. I've got this amazing spunky man. I've got these two beautiful children. I get to do work every day that I enjoy doing, that I find meaningful, that gives my life structure and purpose. I can go surfing when I want. I can spend time with my friends and family. I am genuinely grateful for this life that I live. And I think, I even feel really grateful to the Australian public, right? Because that's why you've asked me to be on this interview today, Mark, because people know about me, people know about my story. People in Australia have supported me and my journey from even all of those years ago doing my first 60-minute segment. I've had nothing but love and support from the Australian people. And so I don't want to be bitter, because I think, well, what have I got to be bitter about? Because you've got all of these amazing things. You've got all of these things that are working for you and not against you.
Well, what you're doing is you're giving me, as part of your audience right now, a great deal of perspective. I mean, I find that every now and then we all need a good uppercut. I can wake up this morning feeling like a bit shit because I might have something bothering me. and then you're just giving me perspective, which is basically me giving myself an uppercut. And I think that's important. I think we all need to have that. I mean, I really do. I just think we just need to get a sort of a clip every now and then and just sit back for a second, Mark. And I think our audience needs to do the same thing. So what's the future, Turia? What's ahead of you now?
What's ahead of
Apart
me?
from being a mom and all that other stuff.
I am on deadline for my next book, which is a little bit about the mental load, a little bit about motherhood. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that all turns out. That's due in a couple of months. So that's pretty much what I'm working on at the moment. And then I've got my running program. I've got a group of runners who are taking on Queenstown Marathon at the end of the year. So I really want to make sure that I'm giving them the support, the being a cheerleader for them, but also giving them a bit of a stern talking to when I think they need it.
And your book, it'll be, by sounds of it's going to be ready for Christmas. Is that about right?
No, it's due this year. It won't come out till next year. It won't come out till next year.
It won't come out till next year. So is it maybe a good Mother's Day present or a good present sort of in 2025?
I think it's an excellent present in 2025 for the women, but also for the men if they want to read my take on it as well. I'll send you a copy, Mark.
Well,
don't you worry about it.
I was going to ask you if you wouldn't, and please sign it. Will you say something on the inside of the book, because that makes it really valuable if it comes from you personally. I'd love to. I'd love to have something like that.
Yeah, no worries.
Turia, like I've never met you before. I obviously know about your story. Not obviously, but I know about your story. I mean, I pay attention to these things. But I think as an Australian, to me, you epitomise, in a lot of ways anyway, what lots of us sort of dream about. A strong woman, a strong mother, a great partner, but a person who actually sort of doesn't mind openly talking about the virtues that sort of keep her going. And as I said earlier, things like gratefulness, etc. They're things, and most of those virtues, they're old-fashioned, but we rarely ever talk about them. I rarely talk about them, and I want to thank you for reminding me, and I guess probably the balance of our audience too, and all those people who know Turia Pitt, reminding us of those important things in life, outside of Instagram, outside of social media, outside of all our anxieties and worries and concerns, but reminding us of those important virtues that basically drive us in our life. And I've had this whole discussion has been motivational and inspirational to me. I'm so appreciative of being able to do podcasts to meet people like yourself. Like, it's a big deal for me. And even at 68 years of age, it's just the start of my life. And thanks for being part of it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
So cool. A great chat. I loved it.
Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it too. Thank you.